Something remarkable happened on live television, the kind of moment that cuts straight through the polished smiles of billionaires and rattles the quiet halls of power. When a young New York assemblyman, Zohran Mamdani, calmly laid out the truth about corporate greed, Wall Street didn't just disagree, it panicked. And you could see it in the frantic headlines, in the stock analysts suddenly changing their tone, and in the billionaire-backed think tanks releasing emergency statements overnight. Because Mamdani didn't expose a policy issue, he exposed a system. A system designed to transfer wealth upward, punish working families, and reward the very corporations that crashed the economy in 2008 and were bailed out again in 2020. Tonight we're breaking down exactly what he revealed, why Wall Street is terrified, and how this moment signals a seismic shift in American political power, one coming from the ground up, not the top down. There are moments in politics that don't look dramatic on the surface, nobody's shouting, nobody's walking off stage, but the reaction tells you something seismic just happened. And that's exactly what unfolded the second Zohran Mamdani looked straight into a live TV camera and calmly, almost casually, exposed the machinery of corporate greed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was something far more dangerous to the people who run this country. It was clear. Mamdani didn't come with slogans. He came with numbers. Hard numbers. He talked about corporate profits reaching record highs while wages stagnated. He pointed out how companies poured billions into stock buybacks, not because they suddenly believed in America, but because buybacks artificially inflate share prices and trigger executive bonuses. And he said it plainly, this isn't a market. This is engineered inequality. Now think about that for a second. Americans hear politicians talk about the economy all the time, but they rarely hear someone explain how the economy is being deliberately tilted. And never on mainstream TV, the same TV networks whose commercial breaks are sponsored by banks, credit card companies, and investment firms. So when Mamdani laid out the receipts, citing data from the Economic Policy Institute, referencing S&P 500 buyback numbers, and noting the 940% rise in CEO pay since the late 1970s, you could almost hear the gears grinding to a halt behind the scenes. And Wall Street heard it too. Because within minutes of that clip airing, analysts on financial channels began slipping into panic mode. You know that tone they use, the polite, nervous chuckle, the well, that's a bit unrealistic, the he doesn't understand how markets work. They always say the same thing. They don't debate the numbers, they debate the person who presented them. Bloomberg quietly ran a headline framing Mamdani as far left and unrealistic. CNBC panelists pivoted the conversation from corporate responsibility to job creators. The narrative machine started spinning instantly, because the people who control that narrative depend on Americans not understanding how the system truly functions. And here's the psychological part. This wasn't a senator. This wasn't a billionaire presidential candidate. This was a young immigrant from Queens, the son of activists, standing in a place Wall Street has historically owned, mainstream television. A space where criticism of corporate power is allowed only if it's vague, soft, or purely symbolic. But Mamdani broke the unwritten rule. He talked about money. He explained where it goes. And worst of all, he explained who takes it. This is why the reaction was so immediate. It wasn't just the message, it was the messenger. Wall Street can ignore protesters. It can ignore think pieces. It can even ignore angry voters for a while. But what it cannot ignore is a lawmaker who refuses corporate donations, understands policy, and speaks in a way normal people instantly get. Because that combination is political dynamite. And let's be honest, Wall Street has operated with impunity for decades. From the 2008 crash to the COVID bailouts, the rule has always been the same. If regular people lose money, that's the market. If Wall Street loses money, that's a national emergency. But for the first time, someone said the quiet part out loud on live television, and millions heard it. This single moment created a new conflict line, one we're going to unpack throughout this video. Zohran Mamdani vs. a corporate system designed by elites, protected by media, and shielded from accountability. When Zohran Mamdani spoke on live TV, he wasn't just criticizing corporations. He was pulling back a curtain. And behind that curtain wasn't a mystery, or a conspiracy, or a secret club hidden under Manhattan. It was something far more predictable, a machine. A machine built over decades, polished by lobbyists, powered by loopholes, and funded by the very corporations that tell Americans to tighten their belts every time the economy shakes. Let's break down what Mamdani was actually exposing. He started with stock buybacks, a term that sounds boring, but is actually one of the most powerful tools used to drain wealth upward. Here's the simple version. A company takes its profits and buys back its own stock.
That pushes the share price up. And when the stock price goes up, executives get bonuses.
Not because they invented something new,
Not because they hired workers. Simply because they manipulated the supply of their own stock.
Between 2010 and 2020, companies in the S&P 500 spent over $6.3 trillion on buybacks. $6 trillion that could have gone to wages, innovation, or lowering consumer prices, but instead went straight into shareholders' pockets. Then Mamdani touched on something that should outrage every working American: the fact that executives often get rewarded for layoffs.
Yes, it's real.
When Amazon cuts 27,000 workers, or when AT&T slashes jobs while approving billions in buybacks, CEO compensation mysteriously spikes.
Why?
Because cost-cutting makes the balance sheet look healthy, and Wall Street loves a clean balance sheet more than it loves people. Next came housing, specifically the role of private equity. And this is where the conversation gets uncomfortable for the elites. For years, firms like Blackstone have quietly bought homes by the tens of thousands, turning them into rental empires. According to publicly available filings, Blackstone at one point became one of the largest landlords in America. They didn't do this because they care about housing security. They did it because corporate landlords can raise rent far faster than individual owners.
They can evict faster. They can acquire faster. And they can influence zoning through their lobbyists.
Suddenly the American dream, a home, a community, a stable life, is up against $1 trillion industry.
Who do you think wins that battle?
And here's the political layer Mamdani exposed, even if he didn't have time to spell it out. None of this happens by accident.
This system is engineered.
Look at lobbying. Wall Street spends hundreds of millions every year shaping policy. From the 2017 tax reform, where 83% of the benefits flowed to the top 1%, to the deregulation of banks under the 2018 rollback law, which slashed oversight on mid-sized institutions and directly contributed to the Silicon Valley Bank collapse in 2023. Look at the revolving door. Lawmakers leave Congress and walk straight into six-figure jobs at the same financial firms they were supposed to regulate. Look at campaign financing. Political action committees funded by hedge funds and CEOs pour money into primaries to defeat candidates who threaten their bottom line. And here's the most important part. None of this is hidden.
It's all public record. Annual reports. FEC filings.
IRS data.
SEC disclosures.
Mamdani didn't expose a conspiracy, he exposed a business model. What he did in those few sentences on live TV was compress an entire economic ecosystem, one designed to transfer wealth upward, into a message any American could understand.
And that's exactly why it scared the ruling class.
Because if regular people ever fully understood the architecture of greed operating around them, the entire structure of power would begin to crack. And in the next chapter, we dig deeper into that fear. Why Wall Street worries not about Mamdani's policies, but about his ability to tell the truth plainly. There's a reason Wall Street didn't shrug off Zohran Mamdani's comments. It wasn't because he said something new. People have been complaining about corporate greed forever. It was because of who said it, and how he said it. Mamdani represents something Wall Street genuinely fears: a new generation of lawmakers who don't speak the language of the elite. They don't dress up their sentences in think tank jargon or coded phrases meant to soothe donors. They speak plainly, in a way that cuts straight through the filtration system of corporate media.
And that makes them dangerous.
This fear isn't ideological.
It's structural.
The old political class, Democrats and Republicans, play by the same unspoken rules. Don't touch donor money. Don't criticize the industries that fund campaigns. Don't use language that ordinary people can understand if it risks revealing how the system actually works.
Everyone in Washington knows this dance.
They call it pragmatism. Outside of Washington, we call it what it is: self-preservation.
But Mamdani? He refuses corporate donations.
He has no allegiance to Wall Street, no fundraisers with billionaires, no lobbyists shaping his talking points.
He's not part of that ecosystem.
And what terrifies elites the most is that he doesn't want to be part of it.
We've seen this panic before.
Remember Elizabeth Warren's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? A simple idea: hold banks accountable for cheating customers, sent Wall Street into full meltdown.
Lobbyists worked overtime trying to block it.
Bank executives warned that regulating them would hurt innovation, which is elite code for stop us from scamming people. They spent years trying to dismantle the CFPB because it empowered ordinary Americans. And Washington helped them. Quietly, strategically, in the shadows.
Or take the fight over antitrust reform.
When lawmakers proposed breaking up big tech monopolies, not shutting them down, just restoring competition, lobbyists launched a coordinated campaign to pressure Congress. Suddenly, anyone supporting antitrust was labeled anti-business. The message was clear: protect the giants or pay the political price. Then look at whistleblowers inside banking institutions. Every time someone tries to expose wrongdoing, the pressure campaigns start immediately: legal threats, PR attacks, sudden smears in the press. The strategy is predictable: scare the truth teller before the truth spreads.
Now place Mamdani in that lineup.
What he did was even more threatening because he didn't leak a document or file a lawsuit. He told the truth in a way millions could understand. He translated a complex system, buybacks, tax loopholes, corporate lobbying, into a narrative so simple that anyone watching at home could feel the stakes. And this is Wall Street's deepest fear: losing control of the narrative. Because the truth is, policy follows narrative. If the public believes corporate greed is the price of a healthy economy, then elites keep winning. But if the public starts seeing greed as exploitation, if they realize their wages are stagnant because someone at the top is siphoning off the value they created, then the entire moral justification for the current system collapses. That's why populists like Mamdani, calm, articulate, data-driven, but emotionally grounded, are more dangerous than any protest or viral hashtag. They make politics accessible. They make corruption visible. And they speak with a moral clarity that elites can't mimic without sounding fake. In this ideological battle, populism versus plutocracy, the populist doesn't need $1 billion.
He just needs a microphone and the truth.
And that's precisely what terrifies Wall Street. Because in the next chapter, we're going to look at what happens when the corporate media machine realizes it's losing control and tries, desperately, to shut the narrative down. The moment Zohran Mamdani finished speaking on live television, something fascinating happened, not on the screen, but behind it. In studios, in boardrooms, in Slack channels where producers talk to network executives, a quiet alarm went off.
Not a fire alarm, but the other kind, the narrative alarm.
The one that signals a truth slipped through. Contain it. And within hours, you could see the machinery kick in. Clips of Mamdani's segment began circulating, but only certain clips. The parts where he laid out the numbers with clarity?
Trimmed. The part where he explained stock buybacks?
Edited down to a sentence. The section where he tied corporate profits to stagnant wages?
Cut entirely on some networks.
It wasn't overt censorship. It was subtler. Editors simply reshaped the story, shaved the sharp edges, softened the impact. Corporate media loves debate. It does not love explanations that point directly at the people who fund their ads. Then came the framing. Within a few hours, commentators started describing Mamdani with the same recycled phrases: divisive, unrealistic, idealistic, far left, anti-business. Words that say nothing, but imply everything. Words meant to push him out of the category of serious thinker and into the box labeled not to be taken seriously. It's a classic establishment move: if you can't rebut the argument, discredit the messenger.
And this isn't new.
We've seen it play out 100 times. When Edward Snowden exposed mass surveillance, the headlines didn't focus on the constitutional violations. They focused on whether Snowden fled, whether he was awkward, whether he should have gone through official channels. The system was on trial, so the media put him on trial instead. When Occupy Wall Street pointed out that the top 1% held more wealth than the bottom 90%, the media didn't discuss the math. They ran stories about dirty encampments, lack of leadership, and confused protesters. Turn the narrative away from inequality and toward the personality flaws of the critics. Bernie Sanders?
He led polls. He won states.
He shifted the national conversation on wages, healthcare, and corporate power. But if you turned on mainstream TV, all you heard was unelectable, angry, too radical, too idealistic. Not because the ideas were bad, but because the donors funding those networks would lose billions if those ideas caught fire.
And now we arrive back at Mamdani.
Look at the narrative patterns that appeared instantly after his segment. Too radical.
Not realistic.
Will hurt jobs. Class warfare.
These aren't arguments. These are mood setters.
They are designed to evoke a reflexive reaction in viewers. This sounds dangerous. This sounds chaotic. It's narrative shielding, a way to protect corporate interests without ever admitting that's what you're doing. Because corporate media doesn't exist to challenge power. It exists to stabilize it. Think about who buys ad time: banks, pharmaceutical companies, investment platforms, insurance giants. Think about who sits on the boards of major news corporations, CEOs from industries that stand to lose if a populist economic message gains traction. So when Mamdani explained, in plain English, how corporations enrich themselves at the expense of workers, that wasn't just a political critique, it was a direct strike at the business model of the outlets covering him. But here's the irony no one in those boardrooms saw coming. By trying to contain the damage, they amplified it. The clipped segments spread online faster. People started asking why the TV version was shorter, why the arguments were softened, why critics attacked Mamdani's tone instead of his data. Millions watched and reshared the unedited version, and the reaction was overwhelmingly the same. Why are they so scared of what he said? And that is the moment corporate America fears most, when the audience stops consuming the narrative and starts questioning the narrators. Because in the next chapter, we zoom out to the bigger picture. Why this wasn't just a media glitch, but a sign of a country waking up to who actually holds the power and who's been using it against them. What happened with Zohran Mamdani wasn't just a viral clip or a feel-good moment where the little guy spoke truth to power. It was something deeper, a pressure point being hit at exactly the right time in American history. A moment when millions of people, already exhausted, broke, and fed up, suddenly saw a reflection of their own frustrations spoken plainly on national television. And not by a celebrity or a billionaire or a polished consultant, but by someone who sounded like them, who came from a community like theirs, who spoke with clarity instead of corporate-approved talking points. Because let's be honest, America is in the middle of a trust collapse. Trust in Congress? At historic lows. Trust in media? Barely hanging on. Trust in corporations? Falling every year. Trust in the idea that if you work hard, you'll make it. Practically dead for younger generations. People feel the cost of living crisis every time they walk into a grocery store. They feel wage stagnation every time their paycheck arrives and buys less than it did the year before. They feel the weight of corporate consolidation every time they try to rent an apartment owned by a private equity-backed mega company, or when they look for a local business and only find national chains. So when Mamdani exposed the mechanisms of greed, calmly, simply, without jargon, he wasn't just criticizing policy. He was naming a reality millions of Americans already felt in their bones. And moments like this have historical echoes. More than a century ago, Teddy Roosevelt faced a country dominated by monopolies, railroads, oil giants, corporations that functioned like unregulated governments. The public didn't fully understand how deep the corruption went until reformers dragged it into the sunlight. The result? Trust busting, new protections for workers, and a massive rebalancing of power. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, anti-monopoly movements helped create programs that protected ordinary people from economic devastation. These reforms didn't happen because politicians suddenly became generous. They happened because the public saw the system clearly and demanded change. We're seeing that pattern repeat today. On both the left and the right, populist movements are rising. Different ideologies, yes, but the same core anger. The elites have too much control, and the system serves them, not us. People are waking up to the fact that the cost of education, healthcare, housing, and basic survival didn't skyrocket by accident. It skyrocketed because someone profits from that pain. And this is why Mamdani's moment matters. Not because he's the next Roosevelt. Not because one speech will change the economy. But because his message tapped into a national mood, a bipartisan, multi-generational sense that America is no longer run for the people who live in it. The panic from Wall Street wasn't about a politician's comments. It was about the fear that everyday Americans were finally seeing how the gears turn. That they might start asking questions they were never meant to ask. Because the truth is, the people at the top are not invincible. They rely on one thing above all else: